Welcome to the Savvy Young Professional Podcast, episode number 35. I am so excited about today's guest, and I know I say that all the time because really, truly, it is a treat to be able to interview so many people on this podcast and get an up-close and personal view of their thoughts and ideas. But today is special in a different way because I get the chance to interview one of my really close, longtime friends. And it's not every day that I get to do this. And so this is not only a treat for me, but definitely a treat for you, the listener, because you get a chance to meet someone that I hold in high regard. Danell Leigh-Triola is a professional in the mental health space. She also is the creator of the blog and the podcast In the World of Danell, where she makes magic, in her words, and helps you deep dive into some of those things that maybe you don't get a chance to think about on a day-to-day basis. We're going to talk a little bit more about that podcast and that blog. We're also going to talk on this podcast about the one thing that we don't talk about enough, and that is ourselves. We're going to talk about self-care. What does that really mean, and why you are the number one person that you should take care of on a day-to-day basis. So if you want to get a little bit in detail about how you can step your game up on taking care of yourself, make sure you stay tuned. Welcome to the podcast, Danell.
Hey, Tanita. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate you inviting me on your show.
Awesome. Good. So a lot of people don't know this, but you are a very, very close friend of mine. And so I'm just honored to have you on the podcast. It's kind of different. A lot of the times I don't get to talk to people that I know personally. So this is really a treat for me too. So tell listeners a little bit about your background, a little bit about you, so they can kind of get to know you, because I know you, but they don't.
Yeah, so my name is Danell Leigh-Triola, and by trade, I'm a therapist, but I have spent the last couple of years working in the people development, working in management, and so although I keep a caseload of clients, I do a lot of management, people development kind of work, and I hold workshops around growth and development for individuals. And I'm currently living in North Carolina. And so that's kind of the ins and outs.
So you work with people and people development. That's very interesting considering the title of this show. So tell me a little bit about just that. Like, how did you get into, or just, have this passion to want to work with people on that level?
Now, Tanita, you can't be asking me these open-ended questions and telling me I got 30 minutes. Yeah, so I've always really had a passion for working with people. And as I've kind of done my own personal growth and got my head out my butt, essentially, I've really found what it is that I like to do and how I like to work with people. So my undergrad is in communications. And so I thought I was going to be this journalist and I was going to ask people all these questions because I'm just a curious person by nature. And then I realized I didn't actually want to talk to people that much, and have to write down what they said. And so I went into the field of therapy, just because I found that being a therapist was really inspiring. Like, it provided an opportunity and a platform that was very different than I had been exposed to before. And then just by progression of my career, after working as a therapist for a while, I was offered an opportunity to work in management, which really fit my personality. I think at most jobs that I've had some kind of leadership role pretty early on in my employment. And so it was a natural progression to kind of take the leadership role. And when I took this position, I was really inspired to work on helping employees develop. So helping clinicians and administrative staff develop. And it took me a while to understand what that meant in my current company culture, and how I fit into that as a management member or as a member of management. And so I think in the last year, I've really hit my stride and my groove of managing other individuals in the healthcare industry.
That is really interesting. I think it's always interesting to hear people's stories and how they ended up at the job that kind of really suits them and their personality and what they want to do. And that's a pretty interesting story, going from communications into like therapy and probably working more one-to-one, and then now working with more teams and internal services. I really think that's an interesting journey, which brings me to my first question. So 2018, I've seen a lot of things where, you see the typical things. It's new year, new me, that type of stuff. But some of the things that I follow online have really been geared more towards the topic of self-care. And so I think this past maybe year and this coming year, I've really heard the word self-care a lot, especially with people in, the kind of young professional demographic. So with you working with people, in their careers as, developing them within their companies and their jobs, what do you think? Why do you think self-care has become such a big kind of issue or a buzzword these days?
I think it has, given the industry that I work in, it's always been something that has been impressed upon me to like manage myself and how I care for other people. And I think it's a little different just in my industry because being a clinician, you spend so much time taking care of other people every single day that, you learn about self-care in school. Just because I work in a field where the burnout rate is 5 years, right? Most people go get this graduate degree and they only work in the field for 5 years. And that's just enough time to get fully licensed and work a little bit past that. And so I've always been taught to care for myself. This is a little bit of a soapbox issue for me because I actually do not like the term self-care, how we use it as a society. So, to answer your question first, I think that the reason why now it's more of a trending term or phrase is because we recognize the importance of taking care of ourselves in order for us to do what we need to do, either on a life purpose mission, to have the best job. And I think we also have a change in our generation and the demographics. You and I both come from a group or that age group where we get to have loyalty to ourselves versus loyalty to an employer, right? That we can go search for jobs where maybe our parents' generation, that wasn't the case. You work somewhere for 20 years, you retire, and that's what you do. And so we're also expected to be more whole people in the workplace, more so now than has ever been expected of us. So I think that that's why, self-care is trending. My issue with the term self-care is that I think that saying self-care really sets us up for failure, because that term means that it's something we do on the back burner when we are burnt out, when we can't take anymore, rather than it be a reward for maintaining ourselves throughout, the quarter or the work cycle, the year. We wait and we go without until we get to that self-care moment. And so ideally, I would like to see people take more care of themselves and then celebrate that care with self-care.
Okay, that's a really interesting take. So you're thinking that the self-care is an afterthought, and you kind of want to see it just be more of kind of a maintenance instead of let's do this when time is almost running out, or let's do this when I have like zero energy.
Yeah. So if you look at it, look at any other relationship that we have, like parents don't say, let me go care for my kid today. Let me go care for my partner today. Let me go care for my job today. We don't use that term externally, right? We don't use self-care or caring for externally. We say, oh, I went and I loved my kids. I fed them. I did those things. And we do them every day consciously. But, I would ask you and your listeners, how many times a week do you forget to eat? Do you forget to feed yourself? Right? How many times a week do you forget to do something that is extremely important in terms of maintaining your wellness? And so we do that so often that self-care isn't really this thing that we use to sustain us, but it's the thing that we use to keep us from drowning. And so it takes more self-care because we've put it off for so long, opposed to having the maintenance and then the self-care, the whole spa day or the vacation being the celebration of all of the work that we've done, both personally and in our professions.
Okay, so it sounds like on this show today, we can create a new phrase, maybe self-maintenance.
Yeah.
I like that. Okay. So for the rest of this interview, we'll be using that term. I don't even know if I've ever had an interview with someone where we just, boom, created our own new word here. Only Danielle. Okay. So when we're talking about self-maintenance, I really want to know, what is your...
Like, let me scratch that. Can we not say self-maintenance? Can we say caring for ourselves?
Caring for ourselves.
Yeah.
Okay. So caring for ourselves. When it comes to, I guess the new phrase we'll use is caring for ourselves. What do you think are some things that people get wrong? And I don't want to use the term get wrong. But I can't really, I don't know what other way to put it. But what are some areas of opportunity, I guess, that you see where people can take advantage of things that they maybe don't usually, or they, have opportunities to care for themselves and they don't?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Morning routines, like having set routines, having habits that they do that are really like it fills them up daily. I think that is a missed opportunity, some kind of morning mindful practice, right? And when I say mindful, I don't mean that you have to, meditate for 40 minutes, because that might not be how you practice mindfulness, but it could be meditation. It could be prayer. It could be just checking in, making that warm cup of coffee, waking up earlier, making that coffee and having the few minutes to yourself to check in with you, right? The waking up in the morning and being like, oh, good morning, Tanita. How'd you sleep? How are you doing? Right? Setting the tone that we are the most important person of our day. I think that is the number one missed opportunity. We will do that with our partners. We will roll over and say, good morning, babe. How'd you sleep? I heard you were snoring. Could you breathe well? We will wake our kids up and say, oh, good morning. How are you doing? Did you sleep well? But the first person that we wake up to, and the one person we can never escape, is the last person that we talk to every single day. So, if you start your morning off with a mindfulness practice, then you realize that at 8:30 you're hungry. So you eat, opposed to waiting till 12:30 and have not eaten all day. So then you binge, right? And now you're tired because you ate too much.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say the first missed opportunity is like developing some kind of morning ritual that allows you, your listeners, to kind of connect with themselves first.
Okay. I like that. Definitely something that I think we all can do, because it doesn't require anything extra. It doesn't require, you to do anything other than recognize yourself other than recognize yourself first thing in the morning. So that's a pretty good one. I love that one.
And it's actually more difficult, right, than you think. Because when you start to develop your morning routine, you wake up and you're like, I don't actually want to get out of bed. I want to hit snooze 10 times. Well, that's an indicator that maybe we need to start the day before. Because if we're hitting snooze, that usually means we're not getting enough sleep, right? So to create a morning routine means that you got to change some other habits.
Yeah, definitely. I would agree with that. So let's just talk about that for a little bit. I'm going to backtrack a little bit. When you talk about habits, do you think that people have habits that they can replace, or habits that maybe can promote the idea of making sure that they are putting themselves first or taking care of themselves? Just little things, like maybe give me some examples of some things that, you know, how when people are talking about diets, right? So they say, oh, all you have to do is replace this with that, and make those small changes. What are some recommendations for small changes?
I'm a huge advocate for like doing some kind of cost analysis, right? Like actually making decisions from a mindful place. Most of the times we're just like, oh, I want to lose weight, so I'm going to do this diet. Or, I want to have more free time, so I'm just going to wake up early. And we don't do the thoughtful work around what that actually means, like what has to happen, right? So you gave the example of diets. Well, what we know in the world of psychology and research shows, especially when people get like weight loss surgery, it's not so much about what they're eating. It's the reason that they're eating what they're eating. All right. So you can cut someone's stomach, help them lose all this weight, and in 5 years, they've gained all that weight back. And that's because what drives them to eat or behave that way hasn't been examined. And so I think, that's really how I operate. Like anytime I'm going to make a change, I want to know what is it going to cost me? What am I needing to offer up for this change to happen? Because I want to make sure I know what I'm doing before I start doing it. Because if I go into this saying like, oh yeah, I'm going to practice yoga every single day at 4:30, well, guess what? That means a lot of things have to happen differently beyond just me waking up at 4:30. That means that I definitely have to DVR all my shows because I can't stay up to watch something and know I got to get up at 4:30. Right? Like that means that when, my partner wants me to stay up and watch football with them, I'm either going to stay up and watch football and still get up at 4:30, or I'm going to go to bed. Right? Like there's always a cost to it. And I don't necessarily mean cost in a negative way, but we do sometimes have to either remove something to create balance or add something to create balance. But if we're not aware of what has us out of balance to begin with, we really can't make those sustainable changes.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. And you mentioned something that was really interesting. You mentioned just talking about the example you used. You mentioned yoga. So what is, or do you have a relationship with yoga?
Yeah, me and yoga, we're homies. Like we hang out on the regular. No, I am, I'm a practicing yogi. In all 8 limbs of yoga, not just the asana, the physical practice. But that is part of my mindfulness practice. That is what I do 4:30 in the morning. Get up, do my yoga.
Mm-hmm.
And I think my relationship with yoga is a very intimate process, and it has helped me connect with just my mindfulness practice, but just my physical body a lot more than I had been aware of in the past.
And do you think that it's helped you? I mean, you work with professionals every day. Has it helped you professionally?
Absolutely. So both with my clients and with my colleagues and peers and individuals I supervise, I always bring some kind of yoga process into it. So in the westernized world, we tend to think of yoga as just the physical practice, but there are 8 limbs of yoga, right? Like there's a full lifestyle practice of yoga. And so if you're really practicing, you're kind of practicing on all of those limbs, maybe at different times. And so I teach yoga, like the physical asana practice, to both my clients and to my colleagues at work. But then I also bring in the mindfulness part of just living well, right? And being mindful of like what our body is talking about. In the recent years, there's been a lot of research about the mind-body relationship. So in mental health, we tend to so in mental health, the tradition has been to just focus on what's going on in that person's head. If we change your thoughts, then everything else will change. We'll change your behaviors. If we change your behaviors, then we'll change your thoughts. And there hasn't been a lot of education or support or therapeutic modalities that integrate this is what your mind is saying and this is what your body's doing. And now that we've kind of integrated more mental health and mental wellness into the physical health and physical wellness, we realize that there's a lot of correlation between like mental illnesses as well as physical ailments and illnesses. And so when I'm talking to my peers who hold space for people every single day, I talk to them about the importance of being connected with themselves, right? Because when people come in and they tell you the deepest, darkest secrets, things that they don't even pray to God about, like you're going to have a response, right? We're human beings. We're going to have a physical, visceral response. And if we don't do what we need to do to release all of that, it will start becoming our stuff, right? And that's where the burnout happens. That's where we're waiting on that life raft of self-care to show up because we've been in the trenches too long. And one of the best examples I like to use related to like the mind body would be the example of zebras in the wild. And this applies to any job that you do. Anytime you hold space for someone else, you're responsible for someone else, whether that's because you need to turn in numbers or you need to facilitate meetings. Anytime we work with other people and we're meeting the demands of our job, it's extremely important to have this awareness of our physical self as well as our mental and our spiritual self. But the example of zebras is one that I really like to use because you imagine a zebra in the wild. It's always scary, right? Like I don't know about you, but I would be scared if I was a zebra in Africa running through the desert or wherever zebras run. And, a lion comes out. Me, you, and the rest of our homegirl zebras, we're running through, and here comes the lion to come eat us. There's a certain biological things that happen in our body that help us escape that lion's attack. And so what you can observe when you watch zebras in the wild after they've been attacked or chased by a lion or tiger or whatever, once they have found that they are safe and they're back with their herd, you can observe them shaking, just shaking. And what they are doing is releasing all of the trauma that they experience while being chased so that it's not part of who they are as they move forward. And you think about the way that we live in stress right now. Our body doesn't recognize or distinguish between the stress that we witness. So if you turn on the news first thing in the morning, what you watch has a physiological effect in your body and a biological effect. Or if you were in some traumatic situation, or if you listen to some traumatic situation, or if you are working in a stressful job, your body does not distinguish stress. It just says that is stress and it's coming to my body. And most of us don't pay attention to that so that we can say, okay, let me decompress. Let me do something different. Let me make sure that I eat really well today because my day is going to be busy. Or let me make sure I eat a lot lighter because my day is going to be busy. We just know here's stress and I need to feel better. And that need to feel better is so momentarily, such a in the moment situation that people have no other choice but to reach for self-care or for addiction, or they end up with chronic illness. And that doesn't matter what industry you're in. There's a great article by the Harvard Review about Wachovia banks. And they did a study, and it's called Manage Your Energy, Not Your Time. And it's really reflective of that mind-body connection.
I'm definitely going to, that is an interesting, I didn't know that about zebras. And now you're going to have me on YouTube watching videos trying to figure this out. And, you know, I think what's interesting is that when you use that example, you know, they automatically, you know, obviously the zebras, they automatically do that. It happens right after. But with humans, I think, you know, our thing is that we have to remember that it's our responsibility to do that. Even though it's our responsibility to whatever it is we need to do to shake that off, to release that energy. And I really like the fact that you and what you do is that you incorporate both of them. I mean, you're a yoga instructor and you have had the privilege to be able to bring that into what you do in the workplace. And I'm hoping that eventually that will be the wave of the new workplace, that we will see more of that, because I'm not sure that, you know, as a whole, we're all as mindful just yet. And I think we kind of need those types of programs, in the workplace in order for us to take that outside of the workplace and to make it more of a habit. So I'm definitely, really curious to see that now. And I think it'll change my view. And then also the article, I know you've mentioned that article to me several times, and I will definitely put that in the show notes for you to see. And if I find any YouTube videos, y'all, I'll put them in the show notes too for you to see. But great example. Just the idea of self-care. And I want to be honest with you. I think that a lot of people that are listening to the podcast, I know we have a lot of people who are, you know, listening to it from a personal standpoint. And I know we have a lot of professionals that listen to the show. And I really want you to give some ideas, because you're in management. And I know that there are a lot of people in our demographic that are starting to get into management or have been in management a while. What are some ways that we can promote, or some just small things that managers can do in the workplace to help promote some of the things that we're talking about today?
I would say the first thing would be to be the example of what you want to see, right? If you are in leadership, you're a manager, being able to say no, or, you know, having limits. Like, that is one way that we care for ourselves, and we encourage other people to care for themselves, is by having limits. If we are always accessible to people all the time, like, that is such an unrealistic expectation, right? That I can be available to any one person 24 hours a day. And so if I'm available to you 24 hours a day, I am telling you that you also need to be available 24 hours a day. That right there throws us out of balance, right? It throws us out of balance, because now I got to check my emails all the time because I need to be available. So having, you know, times where you don't check your email, times where you have that shared, right? Like, not that I'm tired of people emailing me, so I'm just not going to check it, but a very like straightforward, transparent system of between 7 and 10, I don't check my emails, right? Like, that is modeling the behavior you want to see. I think eating, you know, people, if you come into my office, every one of my colleagues, whether we are peers or I supervise them, will tell you that I eat. I will make sure that I eat. Like, I am going to eat. There is no point in the day that I am going to go without eating. And because I already know, like, if I don't eat, I am no good to anyone else. I know that. I know that about myself. And so I encourage other people to eat, right? Like, I encourage them to eat and to eat well. Setting limits, saying no, saying yes when you mean yes. And I think also holding people accountable when you see them spiral. As leadership and as managers, we have a responsibility to the people that we manage and supervise, right? We are there to hold them accountable when they aren't caring for themselves. And it's not even just a supervisor-supervisee role, but it's also a company role. And it should probably be part of our company culture Because what we know about people when they burn out and they are on the verge of, being extremely unhealthy, mentally, physically, emotionally, that's when people start stealing, right? Like that's where they start embezzling. That's where and it starts off small, right? It starts off with, well, they don't need these pens anyway. I give them all my time anyhow, right? And it starts out on the small things. And those are really small indicators of people who are burning out. And when we see that, or we see a change in people from a management level, it's our job to check in. We don't have to be invasive, but we can check in and say, you seem like you're a little off today. Would you like to talk about it? No? All right, well, just make sure you take care of you.
Yeah.
Giving people permission to do what is well for them.
I absolutely love that. And I think it's something that is not done enough. I can see it happening in kind of that tech culture because they spend so much time at work. They spend a lot of late nights and trying to, push new products and update software and apps and those types of things. I think the tech world has really remarkably set the tone for a different type of workplace. And a lot of companies are following suit, just not fast enough. But it's funny because I remember I used to work for a guy that he used to say all the time, I don't care if you are late to work, you need to grab food before you come to work. Like he would tell everybody that. That was his thing. He would say, if you called and said you were late for work because you just overslept, he'd be mad, but if you called and said, hey, I'm late, I'm stopping by, Chipotle to grab something, he'd be like, okay, cool. And I always thought that was interesting. It really stuck with me, but it stuck with me in a big way because I know that for a lot of people, that actually helps. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, you grabbing something to eat, but it was just the idea that he set the tone that it's okay for you to take care of you. And there's no other excuse that you need to tell me other than I'm grabbing food, And so I thought that was interesting that you used the story of eating and making sure you're eating well. Now, I can't say that every time I used that excuse that I was eating well, but it was just the principle that stuck with me for all these years. I thought that was great. Okay, so we're getting to the end of our time together, and I always like to ask people the same question before we get off the call. And so my question to you is, if you knew then what you know now, what would you tell yourself, or what would you do different? And then can be any time. It can be last year. It can be 10 years ago. But just kind of like the former you, what would you tell yourself, or what would you do different?
Nothing. I wouldn't do anything. I wouldn't have, I wouldn't tell myself anything. Like if I could go back in time and give myself advice, I wouldn't. Because I know that I am where I am today and where I'm going tomorrow as a result of all the choices that I made in the past. All the things, whether they were the best idea or the worst idea, and a simple change in that could create a ripple effect where I wouldn't be where I want to go. I can say what I do, what I have learned that has allowed me to sit in this place where I can say I would change nothing, is to not have guilt and shame about what I did and who I was at those times. Because I know that I was genuinely 100% doing the best that I could at any given moment in my life.
Yeah, that's all you can do. That's amazing and excellent insight. I love that. So if people are listening to this podcast right now and they're like, I need more of Danell and I want to learn more, I want more, tell them where we can find you. And I'm going to go ahead and say that this is exciting news, people. Go ahead and talk to them about it though.
So if you are inspired by anything I've said or curious, I definitely have a podcast that just came out, or you can follow me on my blog. They're both In the World of Danell. And I also have an Instagram you can follow at In the World of Danell. And it's spelled Danell. So people want to pronounce it as Danell, but it's pronounced Danielle. So in the world of Danielle.blog, in the world of Danielle on podcast, and also at In the World of Danielle on Instagram. That's where I be.
Perfect. Well, Danielle, thank you so much for joining us on The Savvy Young Professional, and I will talk to you soon.